A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. So, we have a special one today because this prompt actually comes from Hannah. She's looking at the news cycles surrounding this April 26 ceasefire with Iran and asking the big, uncomfortable question. Basically, everyone is taking a victory lap, saying the regime is on its last legs and will collapse within a year because they are so weakened. But Hannah wants to know, what would actually have to happen for real regime change? Is there any actual hope for a functioning free democracy? Or are we just seeing a wounded animal that's still very much in charge?
Herman Poppleberry here, and man, Hannah, is hitting the nail on the head. There is this massive gap between the headlines and the structural reality on the ground in Tehran right now. We just came through the 12-day war. We had the death of Ayatollah Khamenei on February 28th, and yet here we are in April with a ceasefire and a transition to his son, Mojtaba. The regime didn't blink. By the way, today's episode is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash, which is helping us parse through some of these pretty intense intelligence reports.
It is wild that we're talking about a weakened regime that still had the leverage to block the Strait of Hormuz and threaten 20% of the world's oil supply to force this ceasefire. If you're on your last legs, you usually aren't able to hold the global economy hostage. So, Herman, let's look at this one-year estimate from the US and Israeli hardliners. They're saying collapse by 2027. What is the actual mechanism they think is going to trigger that?
The theory is a compounding of three specific pressures: economic strangulation, military degradation, and a legitimacy crisis. On the economic side, the March 26 sanctions package was designed to be a killing blow. It doesn't just target oil. It goes after the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' front companies in the UAE and Turkey. We're talking about cutting off an estimated $4.2 billion in annual revenue that the IRGC uses specifically for domestic suppression and paying their rank and file. If the money stops reaching the guys holding the batons in the streets, that's usually when the cracks start to show.
Right, but we've seen maximum pressure before. What makes this different? Is it just the scale of the military strikes we just saw?
It's the vulnerability window. The April strikes eliminated roughly 40% of Iran's total air defense capabilities. That is a permanent scar. They can't just go to the store and buy a new S-300 or S-400 system right now. So, for the next 12 months, the regime knows that if they push too hard, the skies are essentially open. But here is the counterpoint that most people miss. The IRGC actually used the war to consolidate. They moved from being a state within a state to just being the state. They've seized control of the remaining supply chains under the guise of war footing.
So instead of fracturing, they hunker down. It's like they've converted the theocracy into a pure military junta. I saw a report from the National Council of Iranian Opposition that outlines a 100-day transition framework, but that assumes there's a vacuum to fill. If the IRGC is just sitting there with all the guns and the remaining $4 billion, how does a functioning free democracy even get a foot in the door?
That is the democracy paradox. You mentioned the 100-day plan, which is a great document, but it almost reads like a post-1989 Eastern Europe scenario. In Poland or Czechoslovakia, you had civil society structures ready to go. In Iran, the IRGC has spent 40 years making sure no such structures exist. If the head of the snake is cut off, which arguably the death of Khamenei was supposed to be, the body just hardens. Look at the succession to Mojtaba. It was swift. It turned the Islamic Republic into a hereditary monarchy in all but name.
which has to be a massive blow to the old guard, who actually believed in the 1979 revolution, right? I mean, the whole point was to get rid of a Shah. Now they just have a Shah in a turban. Does that create a social fracture point we can actually track?
It does, but maybe not in the way we expect. We should look at the 25 and 26 protest cycles. They've changed. They aren't just students in Tehran anymore. We're seeing localized economic strikes in places like Isfahan and Tabriz. These are the industrial hearts of the country. When the truck drivers and the oil workers stop, the IRGC can't just shoot everyone because they need those people to keep the remaining economy moving. It's a different kind of pressure than a street riot. It's a slow-motion heart attack.
I'm thinking back to what we talked about in episode 147 regarding the economics of state collapse. You need that tipping point where the cost of suppression exceeds the benefit of staying loyal to the regime. If the March 26 sanctions are actually draining that $4 billion, do the mid-level IRGC officers start looking for an exit strategy?
That's the one-year bet. But there's a historical warning here. Think about Iraq in 2003. We assumed that if you remove the top layer, a functioning democracy would just sprout up. Instead, we got a power vacuum that was filled by the most organized, most violent groups available. In Iran's case, if the regime collapses tomorrow, the most organized group is still the IRGC. Without a total dismantling of their business empire, their ports, their telecommunications companies, their construction firms, you don't get a democracy. You get a military-industrial complex with a new paint job.
So, for the people Hannah is asking about, the ones who want a real free Iran, the goal isn't just regime change in the sense of a new guy at the top, it's systemic deconstruction, which sounds incredibly bloody and long-term. Is there a scenario where this 12-month window leads to a negotiated transition rather than a Yugoslav-style fragmentation?
The Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, has been trying to position himself as that bridge. During the 12-day war, his visibility skyrocketed. The theory is a national union government that includes defecting military elements. But the intelligence report for March 26 was pretty cynical. It basically said there is no unified, on-the-ground leadership inside Iran that can take over the functions of the state tomorrow. No one to keep the lights on, the water running, and the borders secure.
That's the nightmare scenario. You get the collapse, but then you get the octopus effect, where regional proxies like the remnants of Hezbollah or the militias in Iraq see the vacuum and start a land grab. If Iran fragments, does the whole Middle East go with it?
Most likely. A power vacuum in Tehran triggers a cascade in Baghdad, Damascus, and Beirut. This is why the Trump administration brokered this ceasefire. It's not because they suddenly like the regime. It's because a total, unmanaged collapse during a hot war is a recipe for a 50-year regional conflict. They want the collapse to be internal and managed. They want the IRGC to look at their bank accounts, look at their open skies, and decide that a China-style opening or a managed transition is better than being hunted down.
It feels like a high-stakes game of chicken. We're on day 5 or 6 of a 14-day clock. What happens on day 15? If Joe Biden or Donald Trump, depending on who's driving the bus that day, says, the pause is over, does Israel go back in to finish the air defense job?
Israel has been very clear. The ceasefire doesn't cover Lebanon. They are still actively degrading Hezbollah. If Iran tries to use this 2-week window to move missiles or hide their remaining nuclear material, the war resumes instantly. The Hormuz leverage is Iran's only life insurance policy, but once you use it, you've shown your hand. The U.S. Navy is now positioned to keep that strait open by force if they have to. The leverage is diminishing.
So, to answer Hannah's question directly, real regime change requires the money to run out, the provincial strikes to paralyze the IRGC, and a credible shadow government to step out of the wings. It's not just about more bombs.
Well, not exactly, but you've hit the core mechanics. It's a synchronized failure of their pillars of support. The actionable thing for us to watch over the next few months is the implementation of those March sanctions. If we see the IRGC front companies in Dubai getting shut down and the money flow stalling, that's your canary in the coal mine. Also, keep an eye on the provincial cities. If Tabriz stays dark and the strikes continue, the regime is in real trouble, regardless of who is the supreme leader.
It's a grim outlook for the short term, but maybe there's a path if the transition is handled with more foresight than we saw in the early 2000s. We have to hope the Iranian people, who have shown incredible bravery, actually get a seat at the table this time.
The next 12 months are going to be the most consequential in the Middle East since 1979. There is no going back to the status quo. The 12-day war broke the seal.
Well, that's a lot to chew on. Thanks to Hannah for the prompt. It's good to get a different perspective in the mix. We'll be watching those UAE free zones and the strike patterns in Isfahan very closely.
It's the structural details that matter, not just the fiery speeches.
If you're finding these deep dives helpful, we'd love for you to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It's the best way to help other people find the show and join the conversation.
And thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the wheels on this thing.
Big thanks to Modal as well for providing the GPU credits that power the AI backend of My Weird Prompts. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and our RSS feed.
We're also on Telegram if you want to get notified the second a new episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts.
This has been My Weird Prompts. We'll talk to you next time.
See you then.
This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from slow